Peak wedding season turns our house into a loading dock. My wife, Mara, runs operations for a high-end catering company, which mostly means she lives in a headset and a pair of flats, dreaming in rental counts. If food is love, then her love language is a clipboard. I used to think that was romantic in a weird way. How she could look at a ballroom and hear it breathing. The first wobble didn't make a sound. It was an onion. One Tuesday in May, she forked through my chili and set the bowl down like it had startled her. "No onions," she said, soft but final, the way she tells a groom there isn't time for another toast. "No onions, since when?" I asked. She shrugged. Palates change. Mara's job means a lot of taste testing, and that's always been the centerpiece of her patter. I never minded the late-night spoonfuls of ganache balanced on a knuckle, the mouthful of a sauce that she made me describe, like a spelling bee for flavor. She'd lean against the counter, eyes searching mine, say what it tastes like, not what it reminds you of. That was her thing, honest language for honest food. But after the onion line in the sand, she started talking about wine the way our pastry chef, Evan, talks about pastry. I know because Evan is Evan the way thunder is thunder. He explains things even when you didn't ask. Weeks back, while I was picking her up, he walked past with a crate of citrus and told a server, "This rose has a strawberry spine, but the breath is salt air after a storm." It was the kind of sentence you either laugh at or write down. A few nights later, Mara swirled a glass in our kitchen and said, "It opens with bruised strawberry, but the after is salt air after a storm." Same phrasing, with that little smile she uses when the printer jams and she beats it with kindness. I expected her to wink, to say, "I'm teasing you." But she just kept talking, like she'd downloaded someone else's tongue with a straw. I told myself it was nothing, just work rubbing off on her. The season was hot and heavy. Venues stacked, trucks crisscrossed the county, and her crew ran on adrenaline and wedding cake ends. She was stretched thin enough to be transparent. She'd come home in that sleepy, "we did the impossible" glow, and I'd wash the tasting spoons while she checked the next day's loadout. We were a system. That's what I thought. Then the leftovers started getting strange. She brought home duck confit from the lighthouse on a night I knew they'd had a vegetarian menu. She brought home mini crab cakes everyone in town knows belong to the Emerson Hotel, except she swore she'd been at the Orchard Barn. I work in logistics. My head keeps maps whether I like it or not. The trails didn't match. I held it loosely at first. Weddings blur. Maybe the kitchen did an extra run. Maybe she grabbed a tray from a vendor friend. Maybe the universe enjoys messing with husbands who count things. But then I saw the boutonniere, pressed flat in her planner, tucked into a week that was supposedly a retirement party and a bat mitzvah. A tiny white rose with a ribbon the exact shade they use at St. Agnes Chapel. It's a detail you can deny until you touch it. I touched it. Her notes to me started to look like someone else's love letters to someone else. Mara has this swoopy, ribbon-tailed hand, all wide loops and playful hooks. It's the same hand I saw on a stack of place cards she brought home to recycle. Names I didn't recognize, except one. "Dear Peaches," written as a joke on a blank card, then crossed out. Peaches is a name I once heard whispered behind the walk-in when I came early to pick her up and the door breathed open. Laughing. Quiet. The sound of a tray being set down and someone saying, "Show." I'd like to tell you I confronted her right then, made a clean incision, got answers. But people like us, systems people, we collect. We lay things side by side, looking for a seam. I lined up the leftovers with the venues, the boutonniere with the chapel calendar I could find online, the place cards with her loops. I listened for the word peaches inside every sentence she said for a week and heard it even when it wasn't there. It's amazing how fast you can become a stranger to your own house. One night, she came in late with sugar on her sleeve. "We had a tasting that ran long," she said, dropping a bakery box on the counter. "Evan's working on a new petit four. He's chasing this almond honeysuckle thing." I opened the box. For perfect squares, glazed like lake water, each stamped with a tiny gold letter. L-A-Z-Y. She kissed my cheek and said, without looking, "They spell something if you line up the second tray." Then she showered, humming a song I didn't know, and I stared at the little letters like they might form a map if I wished hard enough. I went to the cabinet and took down our wine. The bottle had a ring of flour at the base, like it had been set on a baker's bench. When I poured, I heard myself say, "Strawberry spine," salt air after a storm. I laughed then, a short, stupid sound. Because I knew. I didn't have the whole picture, but it had edges now. And if there's one thing you learn in logistics and love, it's that once a picture has edges, you can fill it in. So I started planning, quietly, carefully, the way you plan a service for 300 with a power outage and a monsoon. The first wobble was an onion. The last wobble would be a tower of sugar. I didn't know that yet. I only knew I was going to find out exactly who Peaches was and what he tasted like to her when she closed her eyes and said she tasted rain. The trick, I learned, is to pretend you don't care. People tell you everything when you're the one passing the tape and Sharpies. I began helping in small, normal ways, dropping off extra sterno from the garage stash, picking up a cranky rental order when their driver flaked. I'm not on payroll, but I'm married to the person who keeps the wheels on. Folks get used to seeing you. You turn into a coat rack with a smile. I started a list in my phone called Venue Ghosts. Every time Mara brought home leftovers, I logged the food, the supposed venue, and any little tell. The lighthouse duck confit showed up on a Wednesday. She said she'd been at the orchard, and the Emerson crab cakes landed on a Sunday. She said she worked Belridge Farm. The kicker was a slice of lemon olive oil cake I know for a fact comes from Bower and Bay, Evan Shopey's for summer. She swore she'd been at the Elks. The Elks still thinks Jell-O salad is edgy. I didn't want to make this about Evan. I like the kid in a distant, wary way. He's brilliant and exhausting, like a high-end stand mixer with opinions. He also has a look he gives Mara when she says something about structure. Almonds chopped 2 cores for clean edges. Custard set a hair past the wobble. That makes him stand up straighter. I don't fault admiration. We all orbit someone. But some orbits decay. One night, I came early and ducked through the back. The walk-in breathed cold as I passed. The door was cracked, a bump stop failing to hold. I heard the whisper, "Peaches." A laugh, 2 syllables soft as pastry flour. The door swung. A tray slid to the rack with that soft metal sigh, and footsteps moved out of the cold. I stepped into the hall and found a server, startled, with a bust tub. She looked at me like I'd caught a firefly in winter. "They're coming," she said, and hurried past. I stood there listening to my own breath until Mara popped out, cheeks pink, saying she thought I was waiting up front. Her hair smelled like orange zest. That night, when she showered, I checked her planner. I know how that sounds. She'd left it open to a week that had an extra thin ribbon pressed where a tab had broken. The boutonniere was there, St. Agnes white, and beneath it, stuck into the seam with a paperclip, were placed cards. I eased one out. Swoopy hand, just like hers. Table 6, in black. And a second, tucked behind it. For Peaches, in pencil, with a tiny heart, crossed out and rewritten as for salt air. My thumb left a smudge on the corner. I put them back so precisely my hands shook. I turned to the back pages of the planner where she kept odd notes. Good vendors, bad ones. A baker who ghosted a delivery and never again, underlined 3 times. There was a line there, written sideways in the margin, like a whisper in ink. If you can't say it out loud, taste it instead. I had to sit down on the closed toilet lid because the room tilted. You can be angry later. That's what I told myself. Anger is heavy and mostly useless when you need to think. Instead, I started assembling something. In my head first, then on paper. A charity gala, black tie, mystery client, hosted under the name of a foundation that had money and a reason to show off. I know some people. Logistics crosses borders people don't notice. I made calls that started with hypothetically and ended with wire by Friday. The venue would be neutral ground, beautiful enough to put them on their best behavior. The kitchen would be ours to spec. The dessert would be the reveal, a tower of petit fours like a lighthouse staircase, because Evan would say yes to spectacle even if it killed him. Stamped on each square would be a date and a venue, tiny gold letters, a map only 2 people would perceive. The tasting notes would read like poetry because that's how they wrote to each other, and I had their vocabulary now. Peaches, salt air, strawberry spine, after rain. I needed proof, not just theater. So I tracked deliveries. I marked off service logs in her van's GPS. I learned that on nights she claimed the orchard, her van idled behind the lighthouse for exactly 12 minutes at 10:42 p.m., consistent across 3 Thursdays. 12 minutes is the length of a smoke break if you're talking. It's also long enough to say, I shouldn't twice and do it anyway. On a Saturday, my friend at St. Agnes, he runs sound, Texted me a photo of a boutonniere that matched the one in Mara's planner. Left behind in the sacristy, he wrote. Our caterer's ops lead pressed it in her binder like it was scripture. He meant it sweet. The staff loves my wife. I looked at that photo until the whites went gray. The place card sealed it. The swoop of the S, the way she hooks her Y's like a fish tail. It was her hand on the cards and her hand on our fridge notes. And it was her hand, apparently, writing to someone who wasn't me. Language has a smell when you live with someone long enough. I could smell where she leaned in, where she lifted the nib quick because she was excited. When she writes to me, she flattens her loops like she's being practical. When she writes to him, she lets them fly. I didn't rehearse what I would say to her. Words felt like the wrong tool, like trying to pry up tile with a spoon. What I did instead was call a lawyer who lives in the same gray world as event contracts. He said non-competes were tricky, but not impossible. He said compliance is a knife if you sharpen it slow. He said, if they used company resources to conduct an off-book relationship that compromised client confidentiality and diverted work, the penalties in their contracts can pay for a funeral or a launch. Launch, I said. I could hear myself picking a word like a platter. We'll go with launch. The last call I made that night was to the foundation director for the gala. Her name was Judith. We talked budgets and guest counts, then tone, then the boring parts that run events. Insurance, indemnity, service windows. What happens if something goes sideways? Only at the end did she say, lightly, and my son is a pastry chef, would you believe? It took me a second before I knew she meant Evan. The universe smiled, toothy and patient. I smiled back and said, would I ever? I became a mystery. It wasn't hard. Money is a mask, and this town likes masks with smooth edges. The foundation wanted to throw a black-tie gala to celebrate a compliance initiative, donor-pleasing, respectable, dull on paper. I suggested we make compliance the theme in a winking way. Everything labeled, everything transparent, nothing hidden. People love the sense that they're in on a joke that isn't cruel. Contracts hummed. I opened a new company, Shell first, then Bones. A logistics-heavy events firm with a squeaky clean compliance policy, bankrolled by funds I moved like crates. The lawyer drafted agreements that read like hymns to good behavior. There were penalty clauses thick as rope. There were reassignment rights for vendor breaches. You wouldn't notice them unless you were looking for a way out or a way in. I was looking for both. At home, I tucked my plan behind grocery lists. I cooked onion-heavy meals I suddenly craved and watched her fork things to the edge of the plate. She started keeping her phone face down. Once, she left it up. A text slid in, after rain. That was all. I stared at those two words so long the screen dimmed and showed my reflection, which looked like a man waiting in a doctor's office for results he already knew. I invited their company to bid the gala, through a planner friend, not me, and I specified a dessert tower that could be built in rings, each ring stamped with tiny gilded letters. My friend sold it as the client's whimsy. A lighthouse, but edible, she said. Every step a good decision. If you were Evan, would you say no to that? He didn't. He sent sketches with little notes in the margins. Almond sponge, lemon soak, apricot jam, summer in a staircase. He wrote, we can stamp letters on the glaze like the old apothecary jars. All the stories we tell ourselves about what we're eating. Mara ran operations on the bid. She CC'd me without knowing she CC'd me, because the address was the company name and I was a mystery. Reading her emails felt like watching her walk through our house in someone else's shoes. Crisp, competent, jokes that don't quite land unless you know how she tilts her head. She never once mentioned onions. Evan dropped in tasting notes that made me bite my own tongue. Bruised strawberry, salt air after a storm. He wrote it as if it were original every time. Maybe with him it was. There's a kind of calm that comes when the plan starts to carry you. I met with Judith at the venue, a restored train depot with a ceiling like a cathedral. She was taller than I expected, with a silver bob that looked surgical. Compliance bores people, she said, standing dead center under the big clock, until it keeps them from drowning. She said it casually, like she was ordering lunch. My son's bringing petit fours. He thinks he invented almonds. Humor him. We worked out the run of show, remarks, a short film, paddle race, dessert reveal, then the letter. I asked what letter, like I didn't know. Judith smiled with the slight cruelty of mothers who love their children too much to coddle them. A little housekeeping, she said. There have been entanglements, in our vendor pool. My board prefers clean lines. We'll be reading a compliance letter voiding certain non-competes that were executed in bad faith and reassigning contracts. She paused. We acquired the rights to the penalties last month. The universe clapped politely in my head. Who's the reassignment to? I asked, throat dry. She looked at me and saw more than I wanted her to. To a company that reads paperwork carefully, she said. Do you read paperwork carefully? Like a recipe with too much salt, I said. Good, she said. Then you'll appreciate the garnish. She gestured toward the balcony where the dessert would be hidden until the reveal. Make it pretty. Make it unarguable. Back home, I asked Mara about her day, and she said they'd landed a big gala with a planner who was a little much and a client who wanted labeled everything, like a kindergarten. It'll be a circus, she said, smiling into her tea. I like circuses, I said. That's because you don't work them, she said, and kissed the top of my head as she passed. Her hair smelled like orange again. I wanted it to smell like onions. I kept collecting. GPS logs. Dock times. A receipt tucked in the van's visor from Bower and Bay on a day she swore she was at Belridge. A paper swatch of ribbon the St. Agnes white. I found a sticky note in our junk drawer. Peaches, 7:40, Lighthouse Dock, no hats, and felt something go very quiet inside me. That quiet is a room with no furniture. You sit on the floor and count the outlets. The week of the gala, I watched Mara polish her flats and press her black suit and hum that same song I still didn't know. She was beautiful, tired, and humming for someone else. Big night. I asked. She nodded and said, be proud of me. It wasn't a question. I said I always was, and meant it, and hated meaning it. I drove to the depot early, walked the floor with the production manager, checked the power drops and the tape lines like I was blessing a field before harvest. The dessert tower was hidden behind a velvet screen on the balcony, lit like a secret. When Evan arrived with his crew, he looked like a kid on the first day of school and the last day of camp. He saw me and didn't see me. That's the pleasure of being a mystery. He asked the lighting tech for shimmer, not sparkle. He tasted a glaze with his pinky and said, less storm, more salt air, and nobody laughed but me. When Mara walked in, headset on, clipboard tucked, she scanned the room in 3 seconds and knew how it would fail. That's her gift. She saw me, mystery client me, exactly as long as it takes to mark a stranger. Male, mid-40s, tux fits, doesn't belong to anyone, therefore someone. She gave me a vendor smile that said we will take care of you even if you don't deserve it. I almost said her name just to watch it crack. Instead, I checked my watch. At dessert, a curtain would part. A tower would glitter. The letters would say more than I could ever say. And then Judith would read a letter of her own, a different kind of dessert. By the time anyone tasted almonds, the contracts would already be reassigned. People think revenge tastes hot. Mine was going to taste like compliance and sugar and air after rain. Gala guests looked the same everywhere. Tuxes like armor, gowns with trains that find your toes. The depot filled with people who kiss the air and say so good to see you, like it's a password. I floated, mystery warm in my suit, checking marks on a run sheet that only I knew mattered. Judith opened the night with a welcome that could cut glass. She thanked sponsors, nodded at board members, got a laugh with a line about paperwork, the unsung hero of civilization. Mara watched from the wing, lips moving with the cues. Evan stood at the back of the balcony, eyes on his tower under the velvet veil, hands fidgeting the way his hands always do before service. Dinner was competent and forgettable by design. No one wants dinner to compete with their own reflection. I smiled and sipped water and counted down. When the film ended, a montage of people doing the right thing in slow motion. Judith gestured toward the balcony and said, and now, a small lesson in transparency. The screen parted. Light caught gold. A murmur rose, then a hush that felt rehearsed. Evan's tower climbed out of the dark like an idea made visible. Petit fours stacked in a helix, each square glassy with glaze, each ring stamped with tiny gilded letters that read like dates, if you squinted. 6/12 Lighthouse, 6/20 St. Agnes, 7 of 3 Emerson, 7/10 Orchard. The stamps were so small you had to lean, and people love leaning at a party. Phones came out. A woman beside me said, how darling, like a diary you can eat. Mara stared up at it, head tilted, the way she looks at floor plans with a missing table. Her lips parted. She took one step forward, then another, like she'd seen a ghost wearing her shoes. I wondered how it would feel to see your secrets iced in gold in a room where secrets are the currency. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady, like a nail driven just right. Servers lifted trays. The tasting cards we'd printed were spare and elegant. Ring 1. Almond sponge, lemon soak, apricot jam, glaze of salt air. Notes. After rain, bruised strawberry, late light. To anyone else they read like a sommelier being cute. To two people in this room, they were private names put in public, disguised as flavor. Evan read one and laughed, a small helpless sound. You never forget your own language when it comes back at you wearing a tux. Mara moved then. Not toward me. Toward the stairs to the balcony. I followed a beat later, two guests between us like cover fire. At the top, Evan stood with a hand on the tower stand, the other clutching a tasting card like a lifeline. He looked at her, then past her, then at her again, as if the letters might change if he blinked enough. What is this? She asked, low, professional, the way you ask a DJ to turn it down without stopping the party. A lighthouse, he said, voice tangled. Almonds. Her eyes were on the stamps. I watched her read the dates faster than she was ready to. You can see comprehension arrive in a person, step by step. Recognition, denial, recalculation, dread. She didn't look for me because the story in her head didn't have me in this scene. The mystery client isn't a husband. He doesn't cook with onions. Down below, laughter rose and fell, the kind that says, we will tell this story badly tomorrow. I kept still. I wanted, God help me, to give her a second. Just a breath. But the show runs when the clock says run. Judith strode to center stage again, taking back the room with a tilt of her chin. Beautiful work, she said, nodding to the balcony. And since we are celebrating transparency, I have a small reading. Compliance, like a good recipe, is about how to do a thing without hurting anyone. When someone deviates, out of ignorance, arrogance, or hunger, we don't shout. We document. She looked up at us. I felt the line connect. Tower to letter, letter to lives. Evan set the card down like it weighed a pound. Mara closed her planner against her chest, though she wasn't holding it. Tonight, Judith continued, our foundation is exercising its rights under several vendor agreements that were compromised. These include non-compete clauses executed in conditions that void their enforceability and trigger penalties for misuse of client information and diversion of work. The practical result is this. Certain contracts are voided, penalties assessed, and those same vendor relationships are reassigned, effective now, to a company better positioned to honor them. A murmur rolled through the hall, curious, delighted by the theater of paperwork. People think contracts are boring until they take a bow. Mara's mouth opened. Evan whispered, Mom, before he could stop himself, and the word hung in the lights. He glanced at me then, fast, because someone always looks for a lifeguard when the water slips. I met his eyes. It took him an extra blink to place me, to pull up the file of the new vendor with the two careful tucks. When he did, something in his face tilted like a tray taking a corner too fast. No one screamed. Not my wife, not the pastry chef. It wasn't that kind of night. It was worse, the poised disaster of people trying to stay elegant while the floor tips. A server caught her breath and smoothed her apron. A donor adjusted his cufflink like he could bribe the universe. Mara did what she always does, reached for the problem and tried to move it by hand. It's a dessert, she said to Evan, like the tower could hear. We serve it. We smile. He nodded, not trusting his mouth. The two of them turned to the work, which is how you survive when you've been caught. You hand out sugared confessionals to strangers and pretend you aren't bleeding. I stepped back into shadow, steady as a metronome, and waited for the letter to finish what the sugar started. Judith read the letter like she'd been practicing to run a one-woman court. Effective immediately, she said, and a hush moved like a breeze. Due to documented breaches, including the commingling of confidential client details and the diversion of services during contracted events, the non-compete agreements of two key personnel are void. She didn't say their names. The hall didn't need names. Penalties stipulated under Sections 8 and 9 are hereby executed. Per the reassignment clause, the affected contracts are transferred to. She spoke my company's name like it was a verdict and a toast in one. Applause, not quite knowing what it applauded, rose and softened. People love a clean ending even when it's mid-show. My phone buzzed. a bank notification, the first wire hitting like rain on tin. The penalties had funded the launch. The paperwork had been a fuse. I should have felt a pop of satisfaction. Instead, it felt like gravity. Heavy, necessary, absolute. Up on the balcony, service began. Trays descended like lifeboats. The petit fours were too good for the moment, which is another kind of cruelty. People ate them and made the faces they make for pleasures that don't belong to them. Evan moved with mechanics, refilling, rotating, saving the wobble. Mara floated behind him, headset quiet now, left hand counting napkins, right hand lightly steadying the tower when the stand rattled. I know those hands. I married those hands. She turned and saw me not as a stranger anymore. There's a look you give the person you share a bed with when you realize he's the client who bought the room you're drowning in. It isn't anger, not first. It's distance snapping to zero so fast it burns. She looked at me like she'd forgotten the word husband and learned a new one. I stepped forward because I am not a man who leaves a woman alone in a crowd. Even this woman, even this crowd. Up close, she smelled like sugar and the orange zest I'd been smelling for weeks. We should talk, she said, professional, crisp, like adding a vendor to the program last minute. Her voice shook only on should. We will, I said, after you finish service. That's cruel, she said, almost a laugh. That's the job, I said, and it was unkind, and it was true. Evan watched us like a man watching a storm approach his greenhouse. This was you, he whispered. Not the parts you think, I said. Those were you. He flinched, like the air had a stone in it. He looked down over the rail to where Judith shook hands with a donor, then back at the tiny gold stamps on the glaze. You could have just asked, he said. And you could have just told me, I said, and we both let that sit between us like a bowl of onions no one is willing to touch. The tower held. People ate their evidence and called it delightful. The tasting cards went into purses. Someone posted a photo with a caption about how compliance can be sweet if you do it right. I imagined that picture floating online without context, just pretty and harmless, and felt something larger than personal sting. The way a story that cost you everything can look like nothing outside your skin. When service wound down, Judith climbed the balcony stairs with the balance of a woman who isn't afraid of heights. She hugged her son, brief and fierce, and then turned to me. Clean work, she said. I'm not sure that's the word, I said. It is the word, she said. Clean is not gentle. Thank you for your discretion. Mara stood very still, like moving would break whatever is left of us. Judith glanced at her, and then at me, and I saw the part of her that is a mother and the part that is a board chair calculate the cost. There is coffee downstairs, she said to the air, and a quiet room off the green room. It was more mercy than I expected. On the way down, a guest stopped Mara to compliment the tower. Those little letters. What a clever idea. Almost like a secret message. Mara smiled with half her face and said, almost, and kept walking. In the quiet room, the lights were too bright. A carafe steamed like a moral. I shut the door. I didn't roar. I don't do that. She didn't confess. That's not her either. We stood with the table between us like a stretcher. How long? I said, not because I didn't know, but because I wanted to hear her choose which starting line to pick. She looked at the ceiling and then at the carafe. Since the lighthouse lost power and we did the desserts from the truck, we stayed late inventorying, and I didn't go home right away. She folded her arms like she was cold. He talks about food like it's a person with feelings. I felt seen by a cake. That's stupid. It's an excuse. Palates change, I said, and it landed like a brick we both deserved. She nodded. I stopped eating onions overnight because he can't eat them. The smell lingers and ruins his tasting. She stopped. I don't know what I wanted. I wanted you to want me, I said. And hearing myself say something so simple I could have written it on a place card made me angry for the first time, a hot flash that left as quick as it came. And I wanted to keep the thing we built from collapsing if I tugged the wrong thread. That's why the letter. That's why the tower. I needed you to see it. I needed him to see it. I needed the room to see it so I wouldn't think I imagined it. Mara nodded again. The way you nod at a mirror that isn't changing. Did you mean to take the contracts? Yes, I said. I meant to keep working. With or without you. She swallowed. With or without me, she repeated, like a tasting note she had to practice. We didn't say sorry. We didn't know which parts to apologize for. The coffee steamed. Below us, the gala turned into coats and drivers, and the hush after rich people make choices they won't remember. Above us, the tower stood a little shorter and a little emptier and perfectly intact. After the gala, the season didn't end. That's the insult. Life keeps its calendar. The reassignment letter worked like a trapdoor. We landed on a new stage mid-queue. My company, new sign, old trucks, took the morning calls. The bank wires arrived like weather. The staff, a practical people, followed the jobs. Some offered clumsy sympathies in the universal event world dialect. If you need an extra pair of hands, I'm around. Work is the language we trust. Evan took a leave. Family matters, the email said. I imagined Judith at his kitchen table, a pot of tea and a folder, and a son who is part genius, part boy. I didn't hate him. That surprised me. Hate is simple and I am, despite all this, not simple. He hurt me with my wife's help. He also made almonds taste like memory. Both things can be true. Mara moved through the days quiet as a rolling rack. We split along practical lines. She kept the houseplants. I took the shovel with the straight handle. She slept on the far side of the bed and then stopped sleeping at our house at all, saying it was easier to be near the warehouse during peak. That was half true. When we texted, it was about keys and deliveries, which is how marriages end without anyone saying ended. A week after the gala, Judith came by the new office, still smelling like paint and cardboard. She wore jeans and a blazer, a plant under her arm like a housewarming gift. Spider plant, she said, setting it on the windowsill. Hard to kill, useful for multiplying. She looked at me, taking my measure again, as if a week could change a man. How are you? After rain, I said, surprising myself. That's not bad, she said. My son is disappointed in his choices. She said it like a weather report for one person. He'll be fine. Or he won't. That part isn't mine to manage. People keep asking if I'm okay, I said. I think they mean, am I going to ruin the next party by bleeding on it? She smiled without judgment. Don't. People trip enough sober. When she left, I watered the plant and looked at the schedule. The first of the reassigned weddings was at St. Agnes. The boutonniere white on the swatch in my pocket matched the aisle ribbon in the photo on the order. I went to the chapel early and stood in the back while a rehearsal ran. The coordinator said the word processional too many times. The couple argued softly about a reading. The sun came through the windows and made the floor look washed. I didn't cry. I thought maybe I would. The thing about building a reveal is that when the curtain falls, there's always another cue. You either call it or you go home. The petit fours we sent to St. Agnes were a different recipe. Hazelnut this time, no gilded letters, no secrets. I tasted one in the loading dock while the bell rang the hour, and I wrote the notes the way Mara taught me at the start of all this. Say what it tastes like, not what it reminds you of. Sweet, nutty, clean finish. I wrote it on a card and left it on the pass for our new pastry lead, who is talented and ordinary in the best way. No poetry, no storms. Just a clean bite that doesn't whisper anyone's name. Mara met me in the alley by the trash corral, that neutral ground where all food, no matter how fancy, becomes logistics. She had circles under her eyes like a double shift. Can we try to talk like people? She asked. We are people, I said. That's the worst part. She nodded. I'm not defending myself, she said. I'm not asking for forgiveness like it's dessert. I forgot that we were a team because I wanted to be seen as a person, and he saw you through food, I said. And I saw you through schedules. And somewhere in there you stopped being you to me, and I stopped being me to you. We stood with the dumpsters and the lavender someone planted to make the alley feel nicer. A server laughed on the other side of the wall. A bell rang again, as if the day couldn't help chiming. I'm going to move out for a while, she said. Not because I hate you. Because I don't know who I am in our kitchen anymore. Everything tastes like letters. Okay, I said. We'll make a calendar. We'll label things. It was a joke. It wasn't. She almost smiled. You're cruel in a way that's tidy, she said. I love that about you when it made us money. I love that you could look at a room and hear it breathe, I said. I still do. She reached out then, not to take my hand, but to pull a piece of lint from my sleeve the way wives do without thinking. She caught herself and let it be. I'm sorry about the onions, she said. Me too, I said. They were never the problem, but they were the sign. She walked back inside. I stood with the lavender a minute longer and breathed. It smelled like nothing from our story. That night, alone in the house that still looks like us, I set an onion on the cutting board and cut it slow. It made me cry the honest way. Sting, tears, relief. I cooked it down with butter until it went sweet. Then I added stock and a heel of bread and a handful of shredded cheese, nothing fancy. I ate at the counter with the window open to the dark and wrote, on a pad I keep by the phone, what it tasted like. Warm, brown, the part of rain that comes after, the air that lets you breathe without telling you what to call it. The next morning, I put on a clean shirt and went to work. We had a tent that wanted to lift in the wind and a mother of the bride who changed her mind about chairs, and a pastry lead who needed a second set of hands glazing. I set trays. I checked tape. I wrote, hazelnut, clean finish, on a tasting card and tucked it under a plate. The staff laughed about something I didn't catch. The room breathed. I listened. And then, when it was time, I called the next cue. Subscribe to the channel